Let's get to Cesare Lombroso. Now, he was considered the first scientific criminologist. I think it's important to understand that Cesare Beccaria was the first philosophical criminologist. Yes, he was Enlightenment. He was modern criminology, but Beccaria was more of the philosophy side of it, where Lombroso was more of the hard science part of it. So Beccaria, soft science, social science, philosophy. Cesare Lombroso, hard science, biological science. Now, he was what we call a biological positivist, which means that he believed that we could determine biological laws of nature. It's important to understand that he knew the race of those he studied. If he knew the race of those he studied, it was a lot easier for him to, even in his own mind, forget that he was being biased by his beliefs. It has been said, the first rule is you should not fool yourself, but you're the easiest one to fool. In other words, we fool ourselves more easily than we fool anybody else. We truly believe some things that we're fooling ourselves into believing, and we don't realize we're doing. And I think Lombroso was one of those individuals. But he believed that criminals were either atavistic or from a racial or ethnic group that had not evolved. So an atavist was a throwback to evolution. Now, he identified two types of criminals, the born criminal, and that was the title of his book on men, and criminaloids and the mentally ill. Now, the criminaloids and the mentally ill, they committed minor offenses, and this was mostly due to environmental circumstances. Now, at the time Lombroso was doing his work, Émile Durkheim was doing his work in France. So we've got an Italian and a French doing work. Now, Émile Durkheim is considered the father of modern sociology. So Durkheim is looking more at sociology in general. We're going to talk about Durkheim in this semester, but he was not intending himself to be a criminologist. I don't think Beccaria was either, but we start with Beccaria because he gave birth to our field. Now, what's interesting is criminology is considered a subdiscipline of sociology, yet criminology was born before modern sociology was born. But, all right, so Lombroso believed in survival of the fittest. Now, he claimed that he could identify who was and who wasn't a criminal based on whether or not they had 5 or more stigmata. So someone with 5 or more stigmata was an atavist, meaning they were a criminal. Now, the list changed significantly and frequently. Now, the way science works is the better data we get, we're going to change. But it's not significant and frequent. It might be significant and infrequent. It might be frequent and insignificant. But it's not going to change significantly and frequently as much as it did for Lombroso. So he looked at folks and said if they had abnormally small or large noses, eyes, jaws, etc., a history of epilepsy and other body marks. He also considered tattoos as a stigmata. So if somebody had a tattoo, that counted as one, even though that was something that they chose to add to their bodies, not something they were born with. Now, briefly, I'm going to stop the screen share because I'm going to show you, this is a caliper. Now, see, you can measure my nose. So you can measure the distance, right? So you can measure it, okay? That's too small, but it looks like it is a little more than 3 inches. See, I'm a Browning. My last name is Bryson, but my mother's side of the family is Browning, and Brownings are known for their big noses. Okay, now I can also measure up here. I can measure the distance between my eyes. My little metal piece is coming off. I don't know what that metal piece is for, but anyway, so I can do a lot of these measurements, right? I can do a lot of these measurements using the caliper. Now I can measure ears, a lot of things that I can measure, a lot of things that I can measure. So let me go back to the screen share now. But that's what Lombroso did. Lombroso basically did those measurements. And he basically claimed if the number of people with a particular measurement in a particular range were criminal versus those who didn't, that by itself was enough to conclude that that this one group was criminal and this other group wasn't. Well, what if the differences between those groups are primarily a race difference, and this race is very poor because they've been enslaved, and this race is very rich because they've enslaved the others and made money off of their free labor. Maybe if this group does commit more crime, it's not because of their biology, it's because they don't have any other way of surviving. In fact, Khalil Gibran, an Indian writer, once wrote, and I cannot remember the exact words, but when I read them, it was a translation anyway. So, but basically, we all understand if a man steals a loaf of bread to feed a starving child, though we don't understand if a man steals a loaf of bread so that he can get richer. In other words, when it's about survival, we get it. We understand that. So that's important to keep in mind about Lombroso, that he was looking at the biology, and he simply claimed that this biological structure versus this biological structure means that this person is a criminal and this person isn't. Now, the YouTube video of Leonardo DiCaprio from the movie Django Unchained, that's what he's doing. He takes the brain apart and he says, you can see these, or I'm sorry, the skull apart. And he says, you know, you can see these indentations in there. And see, these indentations show that this person is different. Now, if I were to see the skull of this other wealthy person who doesn't do these bad things, you would not see those same indentations. But now this other person over here, I know, if I were to take his skull apart, I'd see the same indentations here. And it was basically the skulls of slaves versus the skulls of slave owners. Well, they were racially different. That's like saying this person has this color skin versus this color skin. That by itself is enough to say this person is a criminal versus this person isn't. Okay, we're simply looking at an observation of difference, and the differences don't mean that those particular physical differences those don't mean that one race might be more criminal than the other. It doesn't mean that at all. It simply means they're different. It simply means they're different. If we didn't know that male and female cardinals were the same bird today and we were looking at them, we might believe they're completely a different species and say one is superior to the other because of their markings, right? So it's very important to understand that simply seeing physical differences does not mean that those differences should be interpreted as behavioral differences. Very important to understand. So just to add, Lombroso also wrote a book called Criminal Woman. Now, for men, he believed he only needed to identify two types because he didn't think he needed to identify that there was the normal man. But he believed that the normal woman was still inferior to the normal man, so he believed he needed to add that one to his book about criminal woman. So there were three types of criminal women. You didn't have the criminaloid, but you had the criminal woman, same as the criminal man. You had the prostitute instead of the criminaloid, and then you had the normal woman. Now, the normal woman, again, was still by him considered inferior to the normal man. Now, what's interesting is that once his theory of the criminal man lapsed into disfavor, there was still a belief in his theory of the criminal woman. That persisted into the 1950s. Now, folks, some folks might say, wow, that doesn't shock me. That's almost 50 years beyond the criminal man being widely accepted. So just something to keep in mind, okay? So just one last thing on Lombroso, and then I'm going to stop the screen share just for one last point, and then we will move on to the next video. But Beccaria and Lombroso. So the contrasting of the two Cesares. Okay, Beccaria, coming from a more philosophical Enlightenment perspective, believed in free will. He believed that human beings had the free will to make the choice to commit a crime. Lombroso was a determinist, meaning that he believed that our biology determines whether or not we're a criminal. Now, modern biological theories kind of get to that point as well, but in a very different way than Lombroso. Okay? So criminological theories, all of them, can be classified by their adherence to a belief in free will versus determinism. You should have already watched the video from Unit 1 about this. I just wanted to add that, okay? So criminological theories can be classified by their adherence to a belief in free will versus determinism. Most modern criminologists believe in a combination of these two. Determinism gets us to a particular place, but most of us still have the free will to make the choice. Okay. Now, I am going to stop, I'm going to actually end the video here, and then we're going to talk about some of the other theorists in the next video.